Hello! Welcome to Why Not Both, the podcast all about how our multiple passions and interests shape our identity and our lives. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I also happen to be your host. This podcast is produced by Laura Studeris, and for this season, we've partnered up with Under the Radar magazine. If you like what you hear, you can hang out with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WNB the podcast. And if you really, really like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We are under Why Not Both podcast. When you join our Patreon, you get a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff and you get to chat with us. And that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy our interviews. For this week's episode, we got to spend time with the extraordinarily talented as well as kind Jon Hopkins. He just put out a new record, which I hope you get a chance to listen to, and I hope that you enjoy our chat. So you had asked, I am licensed as a marriage and family therapist in the States.
Okay.
Which basically means I do individual therapy focused on relationships in general, mental health, and all of those fun things. It's basically a master's level for therapy.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. What made you it's funny because I have so many questions to ask you about like making music for psychedelic therapy. So I was like, what is your specific interest in therapy?
Well, I've been having it myself since I was about 21, and with some long gaps, to be fair. I think I had maybe between 28 and about I don't know, I'd stopped for a good few years when I went back to it, and I've been very, very consistent again since I was in my mid-30s. I'm 42 now, and I've seen maybe 3 different ones. I lived in America for a bit, and I had one over in LA. It was very different from the English ones, and I went back to the original one that I had over here. So it's been a very long, been about, I don't know, 14, 15 years with the same one on and off now.
Oh, wow.
And I was talking to her, I talked to her a lot about the process of this album as I was making it. And one thing she said was that people who've benefited a lot from any form of therapy, ultimately, in the end, it's quite common that they want to start giving it back in a way. And she interpreted the album as something like that. I mean, I like that idea. It kind of makes sense to me because it's, well, psychotherapy is definitely part of the picture of why I am where I am right now. It's not the whole picture, but it's definitely, there's all these other kinds of therapies involved as well. But that's the basics of it.
That's fascinating that you said that people do want to give back. I was talking to a client yesterday about this phenomenon in Buddhism where there's like the 2 Buddhas. There's the one that like is enlightened and traipses off into whatever you do when you're enlightened. And then IDK. And then there's the one. Yeah, I was just like, enlightenment, don't know her. And then there's the one that becomes enlightened and wants to, reach out to others, or at the very least, like offer the tools of enlightenment to others so that others can become enlightened as well.
Yeah.
And in a way, like that kind of speaks to what you were saying. And I can hear that in the album. Like, I was like, spoiler alert, I'm also a musician. So it's really when I heard of this album in general, I was like, oh, I need to talk to this human being.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could have gone the other way. You could have heard it and you're like, how dare he use these, not only the word music, but also the word therapy in the dreadful album. So I hope you find it appealing in some way.
I really do. And there is something that I wanted to ask about how it was created, because particularly in reading about psychedelic therapy, there's obviously so much about like the set and setting for it. And I was curious, how did you consciously create some of those sounds that then speak to where we are when we're almost in a very different form of consciousness? And I was like, how would you access that when you're in this form?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. That I think it's the answer is it's actually not conscious. So as I've got older, I mean, I've been making albums since I was 21.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, really, I wrote most of the first one when I was 19. So it's been sort of 22, 23 years. Um, and and obviously before that was all the sort of formative years. And as I've got older and made more stuff, I've become more and more trusting of intuition and less interested in conscious thought within music making.
Mm.
And even though it's very technical in terms of what's going on the screen, and you're using you have to interface with a computer and software for the whole time, you stop seeing that, and it becomes a sort of intuitive pursuit of a certain sort of sonic place. Really, I think of them more as places than pieces of music. So
Mm.
I'm just following wild trains of thought, which I really don't pay any attention to. I just keep going. And that's always my motto. It's like, what is the next sound that's needed? And you're just following something, and you don't. It's almost like putting together a puzzle, and you don't know what the finished picture is going to look like
Right.
um, until you actually have finished it. And then you're like, okay, that's what I was aiming at, because I think there's a deeper part of self involved in all this. So then it really comes down to what is that self, and what informs that. And I think it's you know quite a simple answer really, which is that it's everything that I've ever experienced on one
Right.
level, and then there's the collective level, what I take in from everyone else, and the fact that we're all really ultimately the same, and having we're all swimming in the same stuff, as they say. So
Yes.
there's those two there's those two things. So I can hear some bits which relate directly to my own experiences, and many bits which relate to wider experiences. And then to properly answer your question, I suppose the making of sounds that fit the psychedelic spaces comes from having had enough of my own experiences in that space, and learning over the years, mostly in the last 5 or 6 years, really how to navigate that space safely.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I love that essentially you said that they become like places. I
Mhm.
was in meditation last night and was afterwards kind of musing on the fact that it's almost like I feel like and I don't know if you've had this experience when you meditate. It's like when you very first start, you don't drop immediately into it. It's almost like you're approaching a pool. And then you
Mhm.
dip your toe in the pool and then you're like, boom, and then you're underwater. And like that's kind of almost like how I experienced the music in a similar way, where it's like there's almost like the clarion call to like, oh, this experience is beginning. And then you enter into the experience, but it guides you into these different places. And that's so cool that you were able to kind of bring that from your psychedelic experiences into this space. And I'm curious for listeners who like, I'm wondering what it sounds like, for instance, to someone that hasn't gone through like a psychedelic experience or psychedelic therapy, which I'm, by the way, completely fascinated by and want to learn how to
Yeah.
do. Like,
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I think for me, I view so my meditation practice is, quite long standing as well, on various different types, but 20 years of that as well. And I often see them as twinned practices, really. Psychedelic. I mean, meditation has given me the tools to navigate the psychedelic experience better.
yeah.
I feel like the two, and particularly breath work as well. Actually, I think those things are like pillars of the same kind of structure. And so I think, um, I mean, I started off with Kundalini meditation and Kundalini yoga when I was 21, and then was quite deep into that for a few years, and then transcendental meditation when I was about 34, 35, something like that. And
Mhm.
that became the one which I really have fallen in love with more than anything else, because that's the one where it's, you talk about that pool that you approach, but that's the one where, with no, I mean, to be fair, I had done other types for a while, so I can't speak to what it's like for someone who's never meditated, but for me it felt like there's always a dive at some point into that pool right away, right from the start. And
Yeah.
then I just started to find myself, although that unconscious part of myself was just translating those experiences into this music, and almost decoding what it feels like to dive in those ways, psychedelic or through meditation, into this kind of sound world. So I,
Hmm.
I trust the effect that those things have had on me, to the degree that I let them lead the way, because it's definitely, if I was to make music that was based all around the surface and the ego and the desire for acclaim and all these things, it would sound very different, and it wouldn't be very, I mean, maybe it would sell more or something, but would be very interesting, I think, to me. It's like in that, once you start diving deep into those kind of practices, other things start to mean, things that used to mean a lot start to mean a lot less.
Yes.
And almost nothing in the end. And as I get older, that's increasingly the case.
I love that you spoke to that, because I practice transcendental meditation as well. And
Okay.
to be the one that I could access that pool the most readily. It was like I had the key to just hop in. Whereas before I did practice, I'd meditate after doing vinyasa classes. I definitely had to almost exhaust my body to the point where I kind of get close to it, but even that didn't feel the same. And then there's breathwork meditation. There's I do really like, there's a few guided meditations to get to alpha state that I really like. And now I've learned fun little, I don't know what to call it, other than there's this gesture that I do that I've done while I've entered alpha state so that I can trigger alpha state by doing that gesture.
Really?
Yeah, that took a while to figure out, by the way. It's not foolproof. It gets me most of the way there, but it's not as effective, I would say, as transcendental meditation. That one, it's I haven't found something that I can quite so easily hop in as that one.
Well, that's the thing about it, is it's just so amazingly easy. Once you grasp that one nuance, which is that you're not focusing on the mantra, because and that is, even though that's easy to say, it is for some character types, I think it's difficult to just immediately nail that, because your temptation is to focus. I mean, it was for me, the first thought I had was, well, if I say it more often, it will be better, but it genuinely isn't like that. And once you truly get that, then it's so blissful, because you are unable to judge yourself within the practice, and almost all other ones you are still able to, really. There's effort within them. And I like different things for different purposes, but I find that TM is the one that I come back to every day. Like just this afternoon, I was feeling quite burnt out, and I'm doing a lot of stuff at the moment, lots of different projects at once, and that's the thing that just truly, and it feels like, I don't know if you get it like this, but the more tired I am, or the more I need it, the better it.
Yes.
It's like a friend. It's like your friend that's always there, but is particularly there when you need them.
And do you ever? I sometimes do this to myself, where I'll be spinning about doing all the different things, almost like a petulant child putting off nap time, and then I'm like, why don't you just meditate?
Yeah. It's true. It's funny, but it's funny. Even the other ones, the other ones that I did earlier in my life, even just long, slow breathing, and pranayama, things like that. There was something about, I would have more of that petulant child behavior before those ones, and TM is almost like, it's such a treat in a way. It just feels so warming that I'll sometimes procrastinate a bit, and I'll occasionally miss one, but generally I won't miss it. And I've noticed that it's radically different from all other practices. It has to be kind of taken into account when you work out which is most valuable to you, which is quite simply, will you do it or not? It's a profound experience. You can have many profound experiences with many different practices, but will you do it daily or not? Will you actually realistically do it? That's what I always, I think, rate things by.
Yeah, and what you had said something about how essentially it bypasses your judgment and your judgment of self, and being in that space. I'm wondering, does that then inform how you were describing when you were making your music? Because it sounds like in some ways you're able to have the experience of turning off your inner critic and turning off your inner monitor. So that way, when you are making things, you already know what that feels like to turn off your inner monitor, so you can actually just explore.
Yeah, I think it really expanded the ability to do that. And I just think, this David Lynch says a lot of interesting stuff on TM, but one particular thing is just that the idea of transcending every day, it can't help but feed back into your life and into every activity you do. And if you're for me, the most important activity is creating, that's what I'm wired to do. And it's, I've accepted that is, and sacrifices that come with that. But the difference that's, you can hear it in the music. If you listen to an album I made before I was doing that and an album after, you will hear a freedom and a kind of an exploratory curiosity that just wasn't there and before. And this album is like a very extreme example of that as well, because I suppose I've then found that psychedelic experiences would further amplify that
Yeah.
transcendental thing.
I'm curious how, I love how you describe them as different pillars of kind of like almost like the same temple. And I'm curious like how that did inform your psychedelic practice. And like if you feel comfortable talking about that. By the way, if ever I say something that you're like, oh, that's too personal, like just tell me.
No, I mean, I quite like being open about this stuff. I think it was the whole concept of the album really was to make music without any barriers and to talk about it openly. So to not really have any ego involved, and or to, you know, to the degree to which that's possible. But really, I suppose, I mean, a simple example would be if you're within a, say, a psilocybin experience or something like that, where it gets intense for a while, and you perhaps recognize, I suppose it gives you a level of mindfulness to recognize when the experience might be on the verge of getting too intense, or on the verge of going down a path that you don't feel like ready to go down at that point. Or, you know, and this is, I'm not talking about guided, I'm not actually talking about psychedelic therapy, which I've only had a few sessions of psychedelic therapy myself. Mostly I've been self-guided or with with someone else who's experienced, who's also having, who's also indulging. So
Yes.
So I suppose it gives you the ability to halt that if you need to, and to come back to your body, and just to focus. It gives you the ability to learn how to focus on your breath, bring your breath into the practice. One thing I've found in particular with ketamine, sort of ceremonial experiences with ketamine, is that the breath, I've never read anything about breath work in conjunction with that particular psychedelic, but the experiences I've had with that are quite extraordinary. Almost bringing in like the Wim Hof method breath, that kind of thing, which is a bit similar to holotropic breath work, bringing that into what is often thought of as quite a tranquilizer of a drug, really, which I don't necessarily see it that way myself, but it gives you a level of not control exactly, but mindfulness and a choice of direction, perhaps. Ability to move the energy around, ability to move things within your own, really deep within your own self. It's quite hard to explain, but I remember thinking of it during one experience. It's like you're able to maybe go very, very deep into your own thought processes and slow things down to a point where you're actually able to rearrange them into a healthier pattern, if that makes sense. I've noticed that happening, and I credit that, really, that ability to just be, you can just be lost within a psychedelic experience, and it could be obviously overwhelming if you're not prepared and you're not in the right, maybe perhaps you don't have guidance. But I feel like meditation, like having a long meditation practice before you go into those states, perhaps gives you the ability to self-guide to some degree, and I think that really can allow you ultimately to have a much more valuable experience.
Yeah, and to kind of repattern things in a way like that speaks to what popped in my mind, was just the phrase like intrapersonal magic, where it's like, I think of magic as just, playing with energy. I think it's really funny when people are like, oh, do you believe in magic? And I'm like, well, do you think matter and energy exist? And they're like, yeah. I was like, cool, you believe in magic. Like, you go. But it's like being able to slow yourself down to know that, like, a friend of mine said this, that like when you are having a psychedelic experience, or sometimes even a dreamlike state or a different state of consciousness, that you're not being shown anything that you're not capable of integrating. And sometimes that integration is like to talk about it with another person or to reflect on it with yourself. But it sounds like what you're saying is that like meditation gives you the skills to be able to like pause in those moments and know like that maybe if you are feeling something or seeing something that is perhaps like frightening, that you're still going to be okay, that like you're allowed to be like you're allowed to be uncomfortable, and that it's temporary, and you're seeing this in a way that is sustainable, and that you can actually kind of shift it around in a way that makes you
Yeah.
more comfortable, and that it's okay, like that you're not
Yeah,
going to perish from this.
I think so. And my understanding of psychedelic therapy itself is that perhaps that is an opportunity to not turn away from that thing that's frightening, and perhaps you need to go there eventually. And I'm kind of maybe gearing up to that at some point. You know, I have never had an ayahuasca experience, for example, and I imagine I will at some point, you know. And you know, everything I've ever heard really about that is that it does tend to guide you into the difficult places so that you can process them. And I'm completely sure that I have as much stuff to process as anyone else. But there is a difference in being in a kind of held space like that. And you know, most of the time I haven't been in that situation, I suppose, yet.
Yeah. The idea of held space, I love that. And I love the idea of even your music that you created being a part of that held space, because especially like listening to it as I was, especially because it has like all the interesting binaural parts.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, that would be amazing to have that in a psychedelic guided experience, so that that way you could integrate what came up afterwards or what feelings you had afterwards. Um,
Well, I mean, when I was testing it, you know, near completion of the record, I did some listening ceremonies really with ketamine involved, and those sections you talk about, if by the binaural sections, I mean what I think of as the sections where it sort of moves outside into the
mhm.
woods, and there's a few sections where that happens, and the stereo field becomes really complex because we're using surround, you know, like speakers hung in trees, and then surround binaural microphones in the middle.
Oh my
So
God.
that's how that effect is achieved. And I, when I was lying there on my studio floor listening to it, in that state, I just was outside, you know, even though
Yeah.
my body wasn't, but I was in those woods, you know, which is a place I spent lots of time. And you know, all the recordings of real places on there are places that, you know, those are recordings from when I was there, and
Oh.
not library recordings. That's like those are experiences that I had and captured and put on, um, into the album to try and translate as accurately as possible what it felt like, you know, to have those magical experiences in those places.
Oh my gosh. I was like, you had speakers. That explains everything. I was like, speakers hanging from trees. Like, tell me more.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so this is the doing of a so one of the really nice things about this album is that it has three of the tracks are collaborations with one of my oldest friends, a guy called Dan, who's credited as Seven Rays on the record, and
Mhm.
he he lives on this beautiful farm in a secluded part of West Country in England, and you know he's been there for a long time, and I've been there many times to visit, and we've had, you know, really the most extraordinary DMT experiences there together. So
Mhm.
a lot of the narrative of those sections comes from, I mean, like talking about the section we were just talking about, that feeling of moving outside. We all know that feeling when you have a deep, really kind of almost out of body psychedelic experience that's so intense, and then you go outside for a bit of air, and there's sort of lingering traces of it, but there's a
Yeah.
real reset to that, and then you go back in. You know, there's a very, I wasn't aware that that's what I was actually trying to translate as I was doing it, but when I listen back, I'm like, oh yeah, that's that thing when you
Yes.
you know, and near the end when there's that owl, and you can hear like very quietly, you turn it up, you can hear like the sound of Dan's lighting his pipe. I think he had some cannabis, and you know, like at the end of one of these occasions, so he was recording these sounds with his microphones, and
Oh.
yeah, and sent them to me, and so I kind of incorporated a lot of our shared reality and shared mystical experiences into building this album.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, because I made the mistake of starting to listen to it like over breakfast, and then was like, no, this is, this is not the place for this. I was just like, hold up, nope, 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 incongruous. So I changed things up, and then later in the evening, after I'd like, done then the rest of my day, I was just like, okay, we're gonna maybe like meditate and then listen to this. And that's what I did. And then I just listened to it like in my room with one of my favorite candles and just like, but I was listening to it on headphones. And that did create exactly what you talked about, where I love that the way that you said that, of like in psychedelic experiences, it's almost like in meditation where you're here and you're not here, you're there and you're not there, you're kind of like an electron. You're moving around. And
That's
I
always true anyway, isn't it?
exactly.
It really doesn't even know how to define what you or we are in the first place. So you can become music entirely. If your consciousness is nowhere but music, then in that time you are only music.
Yes.
And that's all that's real. And that's what, that's why I love making immersive music, because yeah, genuinely can take you um, to a different place. You know?
Yeah, it was a transportative experience. And I'd been listening to your album Singularity. Like during quarantine, there were like, I don't know what else to call quarantine, like the time of the panini. I have no idea because we weren't like necessarily in lockdown the whole time, but like
Yeah, yeah,
um, I'm in LA, and at least like throughout most of 2020, I very, very am so grateful that I can work from home.
yes,
But for the most part, I was at home. And then in some ways, even this year, I just got used to being at home. And like the regulations of not being at home were confusing. So like there definitely is a part of me that's like, I could just stay here. um, but I had to do things to like, kind of spice things up. And so I would be listening to different albums, and definitely like I was listening to, because that's why I put on your album over breakfast, is that like I would listen to your album Singularity when I was like doing my morning journaling or when I was writing, like things like that. And it was so conducive to those brain states. And then when I put on this one, I was like, whoa, different experience.
yeah. Well, that's it. And it's nice that you point out, because that is what I'm aiming for. I don't want to repeat what I'm doing. And I think that, the album before Singularity, which was called Immunity, has a similarity. They're not the same, but they're clear kind of twins in a way.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to do a third one. I didn't want to do a triplet. So I thought, if I found immediately that removing percussion and removing traditional structured pieces of music opened up this whole like torrent of new inspiration and ideas. And what came with that is, very much a different mind state. And and this album was born like in 2018, so it was, I did the actual work on it through our longest period of lockdown, which was, well, I mean, some of it was done June and October last year, but then really the main tracks, the kind of heart of it, was done between January and May of this year, which over in England was really a long and grueling, like very tough period. But it wasn't really about that period so much. It was stuff that's been building my whole life, and I've been ready. Just didn't have perhaps the ability, the actual skills to turn that into something that can be listened to by someone else. I kind of, it existed in my head perhaps, and it existed in my dreams and in deeper parts of consciousness, but wasn't really ready to come to the surface. And then I had all those uninterrupted months.
Right.
And then at the same time, I was going through a breakup, and for a relationship that was extremely important to me and someone I loved. And that was in January. And like, it's not a coincidence that the floodgates creatively opened after that.
Wow.
They were kind of opening already, but then the breakup was like a catalyst to just of extraordinary grief and pain, turning that into I was almost in a trance state coming into the studio every day, walking really quite a long time to get there, because I had to live out of my house for a bit while it was being I was having my own studio built in it. But basically there was just this very surreal period where I wasn't even living at my house, and I had to walk a long way in the winter every day, which was actually amazing, just to force you to be outside for 2 hours a day. And then I was just like following, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, just following this thread, this intuition, this kind of spark. Like it's almost like you're in the woods and you can see something disappear around the next corner, and you walk around the corner and you can see it going over there to the left and disappearing again. You're just following that. You don't you just trust that that thing knows where to go. That's how it feels. And then eventually one day it's finished and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what it was looking for.
Like, that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's
It,
and that's
yeah, it was really magical. And I suppose it's been such an experience to reveal it now, because for a long time it was only mine, and I played it to two people, and we had amazing experiences listening to it on a psychedelic journey, but with two of my best friends. But mostly it was just for me for a while to, and then suddenly now everyone is hearing it, and then suddenly people are like giving it marks out of 10 in the press and stuff. Like, whoa, hang on, this feels very different from normal, where you obviously that's going to happen, but normally you're like, okay, with Singularity, for example, I'm not saying I didn't love it. I mean, I was really proud of it, and I am, but it's definitely got a conscious attempt to be a successful album on it, built into it, which is important. It has like big tracks and melodies that you can play in festivals, and that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to bring a sort of spirituality into dance music. That was kind of my mission statement with that album. But with this one, I didn't have any mission statement apart from to follow that spark of that light through the forest. So when you get, it's basically just, so what the conclusion I came to in the end was that this is kind of like a portrait of the very deepest part of me, like my soul. This is like my actual soul translated into notes. So it feels quite different when you then get given a mark out of 10 for it, because you're like, well, I don't even know this person that's marked it. How do they, it's like, so I've been kind of finding it quite a valuable experience, and at the same time quite difficult, it being but what's been interesting is that and some of the reviews have been great as well, and that's lovely, but what I've noticed is that it's the individual responses that have been, it's not really one for perhaps wider press response you can't really expect that necessarily to be good with this kind of album.
yeah.
But individual responses have been really unusual, like amazingly powerful, and so it feels like there are some people that kind of tuned in to the energy of it, and that's this is these are the risks you take, I suppose, when you put yourself out there. I wouldn't change any of it. It's all good, really.
Well, it speaks to a certain vulnerability, like when you're talking about even getting, ratings. I was just like, I don't think that a soul can get a rating. Like you can't, like, there's no help for souls. You're not like, oh, 5-star review. Like,
it's funny that's the thing, and I've never really felt anything like that before with other ones. Normally it's just like, okay, this is all just part of the job. But if you truly show everything, if you reveal everything, even if it's in an abstract way and there's no word, it's just a different thing entirely in a way. It's just like a different job, and there's not really a way of performing it either. So, but I did have this event in Austin where we played it back over 4 amazing speaker systems, one in every corner, and people lying down on yoga mats in concentric circles in the middle. And that was the first time it had been heard by more than 3 or 4 people at once. It was so powerful. I mean, there were definitely people tripping in various ways in that room. Probably quite a lot of them, to be honest. But it was, you could hear, people like going deep into their breathing, or you could hear bits of chanting, you could hear crying, you could hear all kinds of reactions going on, and it was so beautiful, and I felt so kind of felt like we were all sharing something, because I don't consider this as something that came from me, and it's a very cliched sentence really, but it is something that came through me. This comes from everywhere, and in particular informed by the plants that the plant medicine behind it. So I love that, really. It's amazing to get the chance to share that with everyone.
I was imagining being present for that energy, because what you said, it's really it's funny. Everyone I know that, like, and I've done the same, like, that goes through psychedelic experiences in meditation, you end up saying things that you're just like, this sounds like something you would just embroider on a pillow, where you're like, everything
Yeah.
is love. And then you're like, but no, like once you feel that, you're just like, no, that's it. There's a reason why we like want to embroider that on a pillow. Like
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
like and like to be able to witness that energy and take part in it after you channeled it, that was because I was going to ask, I was like, oh, how are you sharing this music with others? That would be so powerful, because I could only think of it like I said, I do remember the moment when I first started listening, because I was trying to eat vegan eggs on toast, and I literally put it down and was like, hold up. I was like,
Yeah.
that I was thinking, I was like, gosh, I wonder how to share this music with others, and creating ceremony around it, and having like the space that one would have for a psychedelic experience, whether someone is using plant medicine during it or not. Um, I would imagine, like, I was like, are you doing one in LA? I want to go to one in LA.
Yeah, but certainly I want to do them in lots of places. It takes a bit of organizing, but I've mixed a version of it in sort of 360 sounds, so like many speakers all over the place, and
Ooh.
that's really, Dolby Atmos is the format, and
Yes.
that's really that's just I wrote it for stereo, and I'm quite kind of conservative when it comes to new formats, because they're not always immediately something you should jump on. Um, and I still believe, well, we got two ears and two speakers should be, you can do so much, as you heard on your headphones. You can move things around. It's not black and white. It's really kind of infinitely spatial. It can be,
Yes.
but I found this incredible mix engineer well, he kind of did the work, really just moving it into the third dimension from those two speakers, and
Yes.
just said, imagine it's just like putting your head right in the middle of it, instead of having it on your left and right. And it it's just the ability to move the trebles above you and the bass underneath you, and
Yes.
the ability to have things moving around, sometimes like between, around the room or something, and literally around the room, rather than just the image of that. The illusion of that is what the stereo version contains, but the Dolby Atmos version literally contains that. And yeah, we did an event in London on the launch, on about 2 days before the actual release, and it was in a cinema, because cinemas have
Hmm.
a lot of the time. And I think it was a largely soberish audience, but it was amazing. It wasn't the same as the Austin one, where people were clearly, it was a lot more kind of Austin-y, and what you heard when you were there. But I really want to do them in lots of places, so we just need to kind of find the venues. And priority is sound. There's nothing to look at, and whether I'm there, and I'd like to be at them, but can't. The thing is about this is that they can be done as things that I'm not necessarily present at,
Right.
because it's hard to talk things right now anyway.
Yeah, like it's interesting also that you brought up Atmos. My mixer has been working in Atmos specifically, like he's assisting someone who's converting lots of things into Atmos. And we were
Yeah.
talking about like where you'd want to use it.
Mm.
Because now it's becoming like in some ways like a little trendy to be like, oh, it's in an Atmos mix. But like we were talking about how it's so effective for specific things. Like if there's a reason why you're mixing it in Atmos, it's like magical. And this is exactly why you'd want to do that.
Yeah.
Because he's like, yeah, you don't want to listen to Atmos on like your AirPods. He's like,
Yeah.
he's like, this is for when you really are creating this immersive experience.
Yeah.
um and so I was just like, oh my god. And then my partner does like immersive events, and so basically, because we've all been like in various stages of lockdown, I've been trying so hard to get like the two of them in the same room so that
Yeah. Yeah.
they can combine like kind of those two ideas. And it's exactly what you're describing. I'm like, that's funny that you're doing that. That I was like, oh, this has been on like kind of like the metaphorical tip of my tongue creatively, to put people to sleep.
Yeah.
I can do this. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, like, and you're right that in a way it would be great for you to be present to witness that, but also like in the way that you described how the album was created and how you channeled it, in a way like you are present, because you're like,
Yeah.
here's the thing, here's me.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of like, it's only relevant. My presence there is only relevant if I'm adding something to it for other people. Otherwise, it's just me selfishly wanting to see what sort of effect. I'm genuinely curious. I just want to know, as you would really, what kind of effects people experience. But the Austin one, I played the piano at the end, kind of like there was a grand piano in the middle of the concentric circles of people lying down. So I kind of joined in with the last track and then did a 5-minute improvisation, and then we had a Q&A with Aubrey Marcus, who was the host, and so there was something that was being brought to that by me being there. And then the London one, I did a Q&A as well afterwards, and just talked a bit about how it was made, and but if I'm not doing any of those things, then there's absolutely no reason for me to be there. Right. And also, we can have it. I'd love to just have it. I love this idea of maybe having like freestanding structures at festivals where people can just go in, and every 2 hours or something it plays, and you can just go in for a listening experience, and on an amazing Atmos system. That would be, it's a whole. I think the fact that it's a whole different kind of album means it requires a whole different type of not even performance, but immersive.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny that it matches exactly the album itself, like the set and setting, that it's like you can then craft the experience around the album, because the album is not going to be like, oh, you're going to listen to this and dance, or you're going to listen to this in the background, or you're going to
listen to it with your breakfast.
Exactly. Do not make my mistake, oh fair listeners of this podcast. And it's wonderful that you're able to share that, because as you said, like, it is really vulnerable to express that part of yourself. And it's one thing to express it and then share it with people that kind of like can hold you in that way, but to then launch it into the world, I'm like, I commend you for that. Like, that's frightening in a good way.
Well, thank you. To be honest though, I mean, being English, I'm always kind of deflecting any praise at all, but I think
you're like, oh God, a compliment.
The thing is, I honestly felt like I had no choice. That's the best way of putting it. I felt like I had no choice about any of it. This was a very sort of strong, it felt like a very, very strong instinct specifically through the DMT experiences. Like, there was information coming into my consciousness or interfacing with my consciousness through the plants that was just absolutely requiring translation into something that could, it was like a combination of those experiences with the fact that I had an audience already. And I'll just, I actually have to go in a few minutes, but I'd love to tell this quick story about, back to my friend Dan, who I was talking about earlier, who I shared these experiences with, and I would say he's a braver psychonaut than me, and he would go a little bit deeper on each ceremony than I would. And one of them, and he would also have several on his own or with his wife, but so he would get kind of a transmission of information, as you do with DMT, and through these so-called entities which feel like independently existing beings. He would always find that they were conveying a certain bit of information to him that was relevant to his life that he had to act on. But one time that was starting to happen, and then these entities sort of stopped dead in their tracks and turned to look at me. This is in his visions, and they kind of said to him, hang on a minute, this guy, you need to help this guy. You need to help this guy get this. We need to help get our information out. And that's exactly what happened, because he was a major part of the album, and he's helped me, he's helped me bring it to reality so it's amazing. And that, I don't know, you can read as much or as little into that as you like, but it's just an amazing story anyway, that is what he experienced, and that is what has happened. And at the time I thought, because this was about 2017, I thought, oh, they're talking about singularity, and I love indulging the full magical thinking that comes with those experiences, and it's like, great, I've made that album, it's got some DMT in it, great. But they were talking about this and the need to build this, and so that's how I view it.
That's what you were following in the woods. I was like, it wasn't a squirrel, it wasn't a gnome. That's beautiful, and that's what you spoke to as something that I think psychedelics and meditation, they'll give you these messages that at first you're like, I totally got that, like, I'm on it, but it's only later on reflection that you're like, oh, not only did I not consciously get that at all, but I actually enacted it perfectly and beautifully in this completely different way.
And that's what's so good about that, is that those sorts of revelations give you faith in that subconscious, that and in the general scheme of things, the fact that there is a scheme of things underneath everything, that does work out and it goes as it needs to go, and you just got to get out of the way and let it happen. And so yeah.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. That's yep. I just imagine like the entities turning and being like, so this guy.
Yeah, it was so weird. And of course, like my ego was like, oh, I'm special, this is cool. But really it was just like, no, it's a vessel. You're the vessel, and you have this, the abilities that you were born with, combined with spending 30 years really learning, or sort of, at least 25 years learning the technology and learning how to, learning the language really to translate this stuff. And then the actual audience, which has been built over that time as well. So
yeah,
a specific combination of things that led to that being possible. But
that's so funny. Yeah, you had to wait for that formula to coalesce, even when you were talking about translating those feelings through the sound. Like, I was in the back of my mind, I was like, wow, mad respect for you, because half the time that I am recording music, I am looking at Ableton being like, tell me your secrets. Like, I'm just like, it's getting more fluid. Every time I sit down to record something, it gets more fluid, but there's moments of friction where it's like you're interfacing with technology, and sometimes technology is totally, you're flowing with it and everything is great. And sometimes you're like, I don't even know how to Google the tutorial to help me figure out why this is not going.
Well, I think that Ableton is an extraordinary instrument, and a new kind of instrument entirely, and that it took me a good dedicated 6 months after moving on from Logic in 2015 to actually get even close to as good as I used to be at Logic. But once I got into it, it was just like the abilities that were unlocked by it and the free flowing creativity that it unlocked it. And now with this album, it's just like, it just wouldn't sound like it. There was the right tool had to exist, the right tools. If whoever's made Ableton they've collectively built something which is truly able to translate. It's not immediate to learn, but it's got what it takes, I think, to translate ineffable things. And that's quite high praise, really.
I was gonna say, your album is proof of that. I only aspire to such things currently. I'm getting there. I feel like I will give myself like a solid B, but I'm working my way up to being able to translate the same way you did, where I'm like, I have so much respect for that.
Well, I'm sure you're being hard on yourself.
I was like, you may be British, but I have ADHD, so I am chronically hard on myself as well, and have the same reaction when someone compliments me. It's like me holding like an awkward souffle. Like, why did you hand it to me?
It's so nice to speak to you, Pam.
It is so lovely to speak.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.